It's no secret that I am not a Democrat by any stretch of the imagination. But what I want to do today is I want to walk through the top 5 reasons why I have gripes with Democrats. The first gripe that I have with Democrats is that they always resort to moral high ground, self-righteousness when framing their argument. It's never fact-driven. You can never sit down and have a conversation and exchange ideas because they'll just shove certain phrases down your throat and they'll say, well, you need to repeat this. Or if you don't believe in this, it's because you're the bad person. So you can look at the 2 signs below, and I think they're pretty decent examples of sort of that moral high ground virtue signaling category, because the one on the left, end systemic racism, it sounds good. Personally, I don't want any sort of racism in this country, and I hope if you're watching this, you're on the same boat. You don't want to see any of that. But what they use is they have a bunch of people walk around with a sign like that, and they basically say, well, if you don't support this phrase that I have on this cardboard cutout, this piece of paper, you're a bad person. The one on the right, my grandkids shouldn't be scared to go to school. Obviously taken after a high-profile event where there's a loss of life with a firearm, but this, I think, is a pretty good example of using that moral high ground, sort of that empty platitude, because this is just made to trigger an emotional response from people. It's to say, oh, wow, yeah, kids shouldn't be afraid to go to school. This must be something that all kids are scared of. We have to do something about this. Another example of how Democrats will always spring into action when there's an event that happens because they know people will make an emotional response. So that's when they really try and cram certain measures down people's throats because they'll get people when they're not thinking straight and they're just thinking with emotion. The second gripe that I have with Democrats is their anti-Constitution measures. So yes, we'll talk slightly about the second, but I want to talk about the First Amendment first. So in this photo, this is from the Anti-Defamation League. If you've never heard of them, they try and label themselves as a nonpartisan organization, and they seek to call out hate speech and hate groups and things of that nature. Well, the issue is typically, they don't like to call out left-wing groups that practice these certain measures. Now, I'm not advocating that we should have some sort of organization that labels something as hate speech because I don't believe in hate speech. And the reason why is not because I'm an awful person, it's because I'm very skeptical, if you don't know by now, of handing power over to the federal government. So what is hate speech? And who's going to be the one to define it? How do we know it can't become a partisan sort of measure that one side can use to silence the other side? So it's not because I'm awful and I want to see the world burn. It's because I try and look at the long run of creating a policy and how it could potentially be used against its own people. So that's specifically about the First Amendment, and we can go into the Second Amendment. I've also done some videos. I'll make sure I put it somewhere, so if you want to click on it and watch it. But they want to say you can and can't own certain firearms, have to have certain magazine restrictions, it can't have certain features on it, you should only be able to buy a certain amount of firearms within a certain window, and the list goes on. You can check out that video if you want to have a little more information on it. My third gripe with Democrats is the fact that they constantly tout how much more a socialist or a communist government would benefit all its citizens. Now, I understand there's a difference between those 2 forms of government, and we can go over that in a video at a later time. But for today, we're just going to kind of keep them together because there are some similarities. So what Democrats want is America to be more like Europe. They want to have a very large central government that has control over every asset of our lives. So in order to achieve that, they need to tax everyone more, not just the top 1%, because you can go over video after video of them not being able to raise enough funds to combat certain issues based on the tax revenue that they would bring in. So everybody's taxes would have to go up. But what they're looking for is a government that's able to really tell you what you can and can't do. So I kind of draw a sort of a comparison is into them trying to be our parents, right? If you still have your parents in your life, they might tell you, well, this is what you should do, this is what you shouldn't do, this is good and bad. That's kind of how I view large governments, is because they want to say, well, this practice or this behavior is good and this one's bad, so we're just going to get rid of it. That's one of the big gripes I have with Democrats, is they really try and have control over everything that you do in life, and I'm very much more of a free person. My fourth gripe with Democrats is the fact that they have a persistent inability to call out Antifa. Now, if you've never heard of Antifa, they label themselves as anti-fascists. And by that definition, they'll say that they try and fight back against fascism, oppressive regimes, and they try and fight for the little guy and their rights. So based on that definition, you might say, okay, Antifa sounds like some good people. Well, before we get into their particular practices, I'll now say they like to draw a comparison between themselves and the American troops that stormed the beaches of Normandy, fighting back and pushing back against Nazi Germany, right? Obviously a fascist dictatorship. So when they draw that comparison, then they really try and hammer it down to say, see, this is what we're trying to fight back against. So that really draws people to their particular movement. Now, the issue with Antifa is they often use violence in order to silence their political opposition. So if somebody isn't with Antifa in their movement, well, they're going to firebomb your store, or they're going to beat you up in the street. They're going to surround you. They're going to tell you, you need to repeat a certain phrase if you want to be spared. The issue is that's actually a fascist technique, because what they'll do, and it's something called a struggle session. So a group of people would assemble outside of somebody's place of business, their home, and basically they would publicly shame you until you joined their particular movement. So by definition, that's something that fascist regimes will do. And a second reason why Antifa is, by definition, a fascist movement or a fascist organization is because they don't like being filmed. So my question would be, if you're doing something good and you think you have a good cause, why wouldn't you want to be on film? You would want everyone to see all the good that you're doing. So quite clearly, they know that they're doing the wrong thing behind the scenes. And my fifth and final gripe with Democrats is their double standards. There's the saying that if Democrats didn't have double standards, they wouldn't have standards at all. So I have some pictures here, and my lovely governor, Phil Murphy, his double standard was, well, during the whole lockdown, people were trying to organize anti-lockdown protests, and, well, he had them charged with violating lockdown orders. Then a couple months later, after the event with George Floyd, you had the BLM movement, and Phil Murphy is marching in the streets with them, basically saying that, well, this is an essential protest. At first, he said protesting wasn't an essential activity, shut up and stay home. But then it was a cause that his party believes in, and he knew he could win over votes, so he went and marched in the street. I know, double standard, right? The middle photo, that's Mayor Lightfoot of Chicago. She said everyone has to stay home. No, you can't go get your haircut. But then she's caught getting herself a haircut, and she says, well, I'm a public official, so I need to make sure I look good. Sounds pretty elitist, right? Next, you have Governor Newsom of California. What was he doing? Well, California is having some pretty strict second lockdowns, and he said again, everyone needs to stay home, can't go out. What did he do? Well, he was found, someone photographed him at a dinner party, way more than 10 people, without a mask. So, of course, he comes out and, cries his crocodile tears and says, I have to do better and all that. Nope, you just need to let everybody else do what you were doing in the first place and be free. The bottom left photo, this is taken after George Floyd was killed, and Democrats, you can see they have a particular scarf on, that's some sort of African garment, and they took a knee for 8 minutes. And of course, this could actually fall under that first gripe, sort of that virtue signal, that moral high ground. But the reason why I put it under a double standard was because it was, I think it was prior to this, or maybe afterwards. I'm not 100% off the bat, but Donald Trump was hammered because there was a church outside the White House that they got rid of a certain group of protesters, right, cleared them out using some sort of tear gas, and then Donald Trump took a photo with a Bible. So Democrats and people that, I know said, well, he's just looking for a photo opportunity, right? So I could sit there and I could say, yeah, that is a photo opportunity. I can agree with you on that. But then what do you think they said when Democrats did this? Do you think they called it a photo opportunity? No, they said this is what real leadership looks like. Double standard. That's all there is to it. That's a double standard. And then one of my favorite CNN commentators, you got Chris Cuomo here. What was he guilty of doing? Well, talking on his particular show about how it's the right thing to stay inside. Being further apart is going to bring us all closer together in the long run. Oh, happy, fuzzy, warm on the inside. Well, he was caught violating his own standards. He was out and about with his family, apparently when he was diagnosed with the cough. But yeah, why is he allowed to do that? Well, you know why. Because he's a Democrat. Those are my top 5 gripes with Democrats. What do you feel? Do you think that you agree with these particular gripes? Do you think I missed particular instances and you want to comment below and let me know what are some other reasons why maybe you have gripes with Democrats? Or do you think I completely missed the mark here, and do you think that I'm just being a biased partisan hack on the internet and I'm just trying to be a bootlicker for Republicans? Well, I want you to let me know your thoughts. But as always, everybody, I appreciate you taking some time out of your day listening to some dude on the internet rant about politics. But I hope you'll consider checking out some videos again sometime soon.